Come along with us back to Okolona today. We're going to start our day on the Pontotoc Road where General Forrest was chasing the Yankees because he had the skier in. We'll explore the spot where Colonel Jeffrey Forrest received his mortal wound, and also the last spot where the Yankee rear guard provided a spirited defense. Let's go explore. You head south from the old Okolona College site and you turn right from Church Street onto McDonald Street, and you go a short distance and you make another right on US 41. This is the old Pontotoc Road. You're traveling up the old Pontotoc Road toward this sign, going in the same general direction as Nathan Bedford Forrest and his cavalry was traveling as they pursued General Sooy Smith and his Yankee cavalry. When you reach the sign, you've come to the old abandoned town of Prairie Mount. You can walk through the gate sometimes, and well, in the summertime the pathway is a little hard to find. And as you make your way past this big old tree you see ahead of you, you're going to bear to the left. You're looking for the Prairie Mount Cemetery. As you travel up the road, if you'll look ahead to where you see the flags, that's the old Prairie Mount Cemetery, inside a little fence in the area on the right. If it's summertime when you make this trek, you probably want to use bug spray before you go because you're going to get covered in ticks. Now you have found Prairie Mount Founders Cemetery. One of the first things I noticed as I walked up to the fence was, of course, the flags and the flagpoles. And then you notice this monument commemorating the fact that Colonel Jeffrey Forrest received his mortal wound about 200 yards or so to the left. This, of course, happened on February the 22nd. Jeffrey Forrest was Bedford Forrest's youngest brother. Jeffrey Forrest was born a few months after his father died, and he was raised by his oldest brother, Bedford. That's why General Forrest took the death of his baby brother especially hard. One of the other graves of particular note in the cemetery is that of Captain J.E. Turner. He was killed at the Battle of New Hope Church in Georgia. This happened in May of 1864. The next grave you need to see is the grave of Littlebury Gilliam. Mr. Gilliam was a state senator in 1843, and at the time of the Civil War was probably the largest landowner in Chickasaw County. He was the founder of Prairie Mount. According to local legend, Federal deserters beat and tortured him to try to find out where he had hid his gold. Fortunately, he was able to get away from them and hide under the floor of his barn. But unfortunately for him, the deserters set the barn on fire, burning him alive. We'll leave the cemetery now and go just to our left up the small rise to see the field where Colonel Jeffrey Forrest received his mortal wound. As I'm walking up the hill a bit, I'm struck by how the terrain is flat and prairie-like in Okolona, and just about 6 miles or so from town, the hills start rolling much like they are here. We've made our way up the hill and are looking at the monument at the base of the flagpole marking the place of Colonel Jeffrey Forrest's death. Colonel Forrest led a charge of cavalry from that tree line up this hill, and they were met by a hailstorm of Union lead. Colonel Forrest was struck in the neck, and he lived but just a few moments. One onlooker recorded that General Forrest gently laid his brother's head onto the ground and flew into the saddle and drew his saber, and then he was a magnificent fury, an avenging nemesis, as such as few men ever see. Then General Forrest ordered the rest of the command into a charge. He led it himself at the head of his escort. The Federals quickly abandoned their position, and the chase was on again. During the fighting, General Forrest had 2 horses shot from underneath him. The first died from its 4th wound. The second horse was killed instantly. After losing these 2 horses, the general then mounted his famous King Philip. King Philip survived the battle and the war. A couple more Union graves dot the roadside between the area where Colonel Jeffrey Forrest was killed and where these Union soldiers lie. This is in the general area where I believe the last Union stand took place, for after all, they would have buried their dead very close to the area where they fell. There is a brown marker along the old Pontotoc Road that marks the site of these graves, and you can make your way up the hill and view them. There are 11 unknown Union dead here. One of them is probably that of Sergeant Alex Brandon. He's of the 4th Tennessee Cavalry. He was killed when he mounted an old mule that became scared and bolted too close to the enemy. As we look into what I believe is the last little stretch of old Pontotoc Road, I need to remind you that the battle probably continued once again for a last spirited Union stand about 2.5 miles on up the old Pontotoc Road from this spot. A couple of days after he was mortally wounded, Colonel Jeffrey Forrest's funeral was held, starting in this home. This is the home of Kirk Pruitt. His granddaughter, Sally Dyke, was either about to marry Colonel Jeffrey Forrest or had just recently married him. I can't find definitive documentation of which. Nonetheless, I'll ask you to use your imagination as we move up Commerce Street in the general direction of Meridian Street, where we'll turn to head toward Oddfellows Rest Cemetery. This is where Colonel Forrest was laid to rest for a couple of years until after the war, and his body was moved to Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis. Sally Dyke's father, Captain John T. Dyke, was Judge Advocate of the 17th Regiment of the Mississippi Militia in 1843. He was mayor of Aberdeen in 1844, and he also was a stockholder in the Aberdeen Steamboating and Shipping Company. I'm not exactly sure where physically Colonel Jeffrey Forrest was buried for a couple of years, but nonetheless, this is his marker in Oddfellows Rest Cemetery in Aberdeen. Not too far from Colonel Forrest's marker is the family plot of Colonel Samuel J. Golson. You'll notice on his marker he's listed as General, but I see him generally referred to as Colonel. He was Colonel of some of the local militia during the campaign for Okolona. General Forrest sent Golson and his militia out toward Houston so that they could provide protection and well harass the Yankees from the west. If you remember, back in the Campaign for Okolona Part 1 video, I introduced you to a guy named Isaac Jarmon. This is his family plot, and now you're looking back toward the Jeffrey Forrest marker. So it's just down the road from Jeffrey's marker. let's take a look around at some of his family members, most of which had a part to play in the campaign for Okolona. You remember Mr. Jarmon was shot in his front yard as he was attempting to defend his home from the Yankees. According to some accounts, the Yankees yelled at him to stop before they fired. In addition to killing Isaac, the Yankees looted the house and burned it after they had taken everything they wanted, and the women ran out of the house, and one of them grabbed a cloak because of the cold. But, according to local lore, a Yankee took it from her and threw it back into the house so that it would burn as well. One other local folktale is that the federal officer that gave the order to shoot Mr. Jarmon found a mason's apron in the house. Upon finding this apron, this Yankee said, "Oh, if I'd only known he was a mason, I wouldn't have killed him." Nonetheless, the people that you're looking at in this family plot had a large part to play in the campaign for Okolona. This is the home of Stephen D. Lee in Columbus, Mississippi. And in this home hangs an incredible portrait or painting of General Nathan Bedford Forrest. This is a photo of the painting of General Forrest that hangs in the Stephen D. Lee home, and you'll notice the wintry background. This should tell you that this was probably done in the winter of 1863 as he was in Tennessee recruiting members for his command under General Lee. If you want to learn something about the campaign for Okolona, one of the first places to start is this book, which I've referenced many times during these 3 videos. This, of course, is The Battle of Okolona, Defending the Mississippi Prairie, and its author is Brandon Beck. Big Daddy and I hope you've enjoyed part 3 of our 3-part series of the campaign for Okolona. We invite you to do the Google, do a little research, and maybe read Mr. Beck's book, and come explore Okolona for yourself sometimes. Thank you.